Hey, thanks for joining us on this early Wednesday morning. We appreciate everyone getting up and talking about this very important conversation with us. We first want to talk about the Texas floods that happened over 4th of July weekend. Now, this absolute devastation and this tragedy, I think, has captured the hearts of a lot of people across the country and across the world, and has raised a lot of really good questions, about the flooding itself. How did this happen, and how can we make sure this doesn't happen again? A quick update on those floods before we get started here. 160 people are still thought to be missing in the central Texas area, and already 118 people, at least 118 people, have already lost their lives. Now, this is more fatalities than Harvey, which is a shocking statistic, and it's the biggest flood event that we've seen since the 1970s. So, because of the recent events, we want to have a conversation around what happened and what can we do in the future to prevent this from happening again. Now, I'm meteorologist Taylor Cox. Thanks for joining us today. We also have Derik Kline, CEO of HailTrace, with us as well. Derik, whenever you originally heard about this event, what were your first initial response? What did you feel?
So I heard about it the morning that it occurred. So I would say probably what 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning was when I first heard about the church camp. And I'd actually just picked up my son from church camp the day before. Um, and so it really kind of hit home, right? That he I just picked him up, and my other daughter was at church camp 2 weeks before that. And it really makes you think about, um, what where you're taking your kids, and are they going to be safe? And I don't think this should be anything that makes us say, oh, we can't send our kids to church camp, or they can't do that. I'm not saying that by any means, but it definitely makes you think about things. And I'll say, from my perspective, so like as a storm chaser, my biggest fear is not the tornado, it's actually flooding. Um, and so in hurricanes, like, if you ever watch me, if you could be on the inside of me prepping to storm chase a hurricane, I am prepping for the water. I'm not prepping for the wind. And so um, that is the most deadliest thing. And when I storm chase, sometimes we're in blinding rain, where we can't see. And so my fear is and always has been, has there been enough rain that the creek or the river that I'm going to cross soon has gone over the road, and is it raining so hard that I won't see it until it's too late? Um, and so that's the danger, right? Um, and we'll kind of get into some of the different types of warnings, and kind of the psyche behind warnings, and we'll also list some. I'd like to list some really good podcasts that some people can go take a listen to. Maybe we can post those in the comments of some of these things that, if you want to learn more. Um, and I would say, in this conversation, like, we're gonna really we're gonna try to kind of keep everything on the table, right? There's been a lot of people posting about things, cloud seeding, right? We're gonna talk about it here. We're not gonna shy away from it. Um, we're gonna talk about, we're gonna ask some questions. Why was this such one of the deadliest flash flooding events in the history of the United States? Why does that happen in 2025, when we expect that we would be better, than than what we were 50, 100 years ago, right? We expect that we should, communication is better now. So we should be better at protecting lives from this. So, lots of questions, and I'm not sure that we're going to answer all of them, but we're going to try to tackle them, especially from a weather standpoint. We're going to give some facts, and these will be facts. So, so you're able to kind of take those and go with it, and just kind of see where that leads you. So a couple things I think, first of all, one of the rumors that I saw floating around, and I want, and from a political standpoint, I'm probably going to tackle stuff from both sides of the spectrum. Meaning, I'm gonna actually agree with both sides. So if you're Republican or Democrat, at times you may have seen something that Democrats are saying, and I'm going to go, oh, I kind of agree with that stance on this. And then same thing from a Republican standpoint. Like I may agree with some things, um, and I might be neutral on some other things. So um, feel free. I don't really care what you want to say about me. So if you want to talk about it, I'm open for the conversation. So by that I'm saying, post your comments, post your questions here. Um, if they're not too stupid, I'll probably address them. Um, so I'm sure we might get some that I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm not even going to touch that. But the first thing that I want to touch here is the idea that the National Weather Service dropped the ball on this event. There were a lot of talks. There have been a lot of layoffs um, from throughout the weather industry, especially government based weather industry. And so there were a lot of people saying that the Trump layoffs resulted in a lack of a lack of response from the National Weather Service. So I want to kind of take that and say absolutely 100% no. There is zero chance that the Trump layoffs had anything to do with the outcome of this event. Um, so maybe on that one, I'm standing on the Republican side of things. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna give you some statistics. On it at a National Weather Service office on a typical day, they have one, maybe two people working to do the forecast and warnings and different things of that nature. On this particular evening and morning, at the San Antonio / Austin National Weather Service office, they had five. So they were very, very well staffed um, in what they were showing for the warnings. A few other things, some statistics here to kind of go over. So the morning, let me find it here. So I kind of took down some notes. So the morning of July 3rd, so before everything occurred, the National Weather Service issued a flood hazard outlook identifying the potential for flash flooding in and around Kerrville. Um, at 1:18 p.m., so 15 hours before the flooding occurred, the National Weather Service in San Antonio issued a flash flood watch for the Hill Country, including Kerr County, warning of the potential for heavy rain. At 6:22 p.m., the National Weather Center warned of considerable flooding risk, including Kerrville, north and west of San Antonio. And at approximately 8:12 p.m., the flash flood watch was extended. At 11:41 p.m., the first flash flood warning was issued for Bandera County. At 1:14 a.m., a considerable flash flood warning was issued for Bandera and Kerr counties. So this is at 1:14. This is 3 hours before the considerable flood warning would have issued for Kerr. This would have issued the Taylor. You can tell what's the warning on your phone.
The WEA. So it's
The
wireless
WEA.
emergency alert. So it's WEA. It's like that sound that your phone makes whenever you get an Amber Alert. It's that blaring noise that shocks everyone in the room. That's what they issue. They issued that warning to trigger the WEA on your phone.
Yep. And so that was issued at 1:14 a.m. At 3:06 a.m., so still an hour before. National Weather Service on Twitter that this is a dangerous flash flooding event is ongoing in parts of Kerr and Bandera counties. At 4:03 a.m., the flash flood warning for South Central Kerr County, including Hunt, was upgraded to a flash flood emergency. So this is about the same time that the flooding was impacting some of those areas. It was upgraded to that flash flood emergency. Um, One thing I did learn about San Antonio, Austin, the National Weather Service office. So this general area of the country is known as Flash Flood Alley. It's one of the worst flash flooding areas for a couple of different reasons. It's This is one of the deadliest parts of the country for flash flooding, and And because of that reason, this National Weather Service office never issues a standard flash flood warning. They always issue a considerable tag on it. So every warning that was issued by this office was alerting people's cell phones. Um, Now we're going to get into kind of some of the psychology behind some of that, because I think that's also important to understand when we talk about this event. And again, we're going to get into the cloud seeding stuff too. So, did cloud seeding cause this event? We're going to talk about that. So, but I kind of want to go through the whole scenario, that the whole nuts and bolts of what actually occurred with this event. Um, so, um, so as we kind of look at that, right? So the warnings were issued. Now, one thing that I read that I thought was really, really interesting. Um, I actually heard this on a podcast, Weather Brains, a great, great podcast. Is that I'm not sure how many of you guys have actually sent your kids to church camp before, or if you've ever been to church camp, or not church camp, just summer camp, right? In general, the first thing you do, so all the volunteers that work at the camp, so this is all the teenagers, all the counselors that are there to be with the kids, right? The first thing that all of these people do is they turn in their cell phone. So this is something that I hadn't thought of, right? So we just talked about this warning issued would have set off everybody's cell phones, except everybody's cell phone was turned off or
Hmm.
wasn't at camp. So something to think about, right? Some people also talked about the flood. So like Tulsa, Oklahoma used to be the flood capital. Didn't actually know this, but back in the 70s, they had just a series of floods. Tulsa now actually has flood sirens. So it sounds different than a tornado warning. They're one of the only places in the country that has flood sirens. And they have actually flipped that now. So Tulsa is not the one of the deadliest flood places in the country. What
Yeah,
were you gonna
they've
say,
done
Taylor?
some really good work down there, and I thought that that was a very, very interesting point that they made, that it's a different sound than a tornado siren. Think about whenever that tornado siren goes off, you stay indoors, but if you hear that
Mm-hmm.
flood siren, you know to evacuate outdoors to higher ground. So there's a different action to be taken with those different sounds, and I thought that was really interesting that there is a different sound for a flood siren versus a tornado siren. My question would then be, I've never heard a flood siren before. Those teenagers, those kids at the camp, would they know what to do if they heard a flood siren? Maybe it's different in
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the country, but I grew up in Tulsa. I've never heard a flood siren that I know of before. So I thought that was a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting point that they made.
Yeah, yeah, and it's definitely been effective right now. So is that something that needs to be put in place? The other thing that I thought was really interesting was what most people's so first of all, what you have to realize is, so most people are used to what to do on a warning when it impacts their local area, right? And so most people do not live up up in the hill country of Texas, right? This is actually a fairly unpopulated area. A lot of people vacation there, but most people don't live there. When you talk about a flash flood warning, um, flash flood warnings in 99% of the country are issued to keep motorists off of the road, to not go out. They want you to hunker down and stay put where you're at. So I thought this was really interesting, right? When we talk about the campers in this area, is okay. I just got this flash flood warning. Well, I'm not supposed to go jump in my car and drive away, right? Because flooding. I mean, more people are killed from flooding in their cars than tornadoes, than hurricanes. Like, this is the deadliest thing that happens, and so we're entrained in our brains to not get in our car, not to move, to stay put, right? Another thing to think about too is this camp location, right? I mean, how much of this camp location washed away? Apparently, I don't think it has, right? So
Really?
now I don't know for sure, so I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to make the assumption that these buildings have not been washed away in a flood on the Guadalupe River. And so, should the camp know what's potential? Yes, I think so. Um, but does it make them a bad person because they didn't? I don't think so. And again, sometimes it's okay. Like there's a lot that we're going to learn from this, and there's probably going to be some crazy action that's going to take place. Like I would not be shocked if sirens are not put down the Guadalupe River because the water rises so quick that the gauges can pick it up, right? So if you've got a heavy rain event, a gauge comes up really high, boom, sound the sirens all the way down the river.
It's an immediate
It's
trigger.
right. And that was something that I can't remember what her name was. I'd have to. We can probably post in the comments, um, but it's something that can go into creating a safer environment, right? So now we have the phones, we have the WIA that can be triggered, but we can also sound the siren up and down the river to alert people. And look, almost every safety thing that we have in place now to make us safer around weather is because a lot of people were killed at some point from that weather event. And that's
Mhm.
just the nature of our society in general is we react, um, and then and then we're prepared for it after it's happened. And I hate that it is that way. But sometimes we don't know what Mother Nature is capable of either, right? Mother Nature still surprises us every day.
Absolutely.
And this particular situation, it did some stuff that people are like, wow, that's wild. Like there's some meteorologists that are just looking at it going, yeah, I didn't see that happening. So um so yeah, so that's um that those are kind of my takes right now. I do think, going forward, I think these camps they need to have a flood preparation plan. Do they need to maybe build the rooms up a little higher? Maybe. Maybe that's a better solution. But I mean, you saw how fast the water came up, right? Like, I mean, had this been in the afternoon, could there have been people floating on their tubes? Um, you know, I think there would have been less deaths, and that also goes into this, right? This was Fourth of July weekend. The population in this part of the country has risen, which means more people are coming out here to enjoy their Fourth of July weekend. It also happened at 4 o'clock in the morning. Taylor, I'm gonna ask you this because I feel like you probably have done the same thing, right? The We Alert has gone off on your phone for a tornado warning at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you go, I mean, if it's my time, it's my time. I'm going back to sleep. Right
It
now, I
I think a lot of people have done that. I've definitely, as a meteorologist, and I know the hazards and I know the dangers of the weather. I've seen them in person. I will look at the radar and say, I'm not in that. I know I'm in the warning, I'm in the polygon, but I'm not in that. And I'll turn back over and go to sleep. Should I be doing that? Probably not. However, I think that we can all relate to that sentiment that it's 3, 4 in the morning on a holiday weekend. I'm getting my sleep in. And we don't know if that's what happened here, but yeah, I think that raises a great point. It's at night, which we know any weather event at night makes it much more dangerous. It is over a holiday weekend, so your brain is on holiday. Your brain is not as ready to react as it would be maybe during the work week. So I think these are all great points.
and they're wading in water that's knee deep that whole day. They were all
Mm.
playing in the river. It was knee deep water. There was no flood.
Mhm.
Now again, that's human nature, right? Like that's our experience is what we see. And we nobody had experienced that. Now, some of the other things that go into this part of the country, why is it? So it's a big limestone area, so a lot of the rock is limestone, so there's not a lot of soil. Good luck digging a hole in the ground in this part of Texas. And it's hills, right? It's hill country, right? So a lot of the heavy rain didn't actually occur at the camp. Most of the heavy rain actually happened upstream from the camp, and then the water rushed into the camp. But it's the equivalent of all these hills, and the rain came down, at 3, 4, 5, 6, even 7 inches of rain per hour. We're gonna get into what caused that. Um, was it cloud seeding? We're getting ready to touch on that, but was it 6, 7 inches of rain per hour? And it flows right into the river really quickly because the soil doesn't soak up any of the water because there is no soil. It's all limestone rock. The other thing too about the soil in this particular time is this part of the country was in one of the worst droughts in the U.S. at this time. So the soil was extremely dry that does exist. And we know from historical, look at California, right? Like when you get heavy rain on super dry soil, it just runs right off. And then so the same thing happened. So it was kind of like a trifecta, right? Where we had drought conditions that didn't allow the soil to soak up anything. We had very minimal soil, and then we had all the hills that allowed it all to run into some of the same areas. Um, and and then it just happened to happen at the right location, this heavy rain, or the wrong location, to where it formed this wall of water that goes ripping down the river. And you get a 30 to 35 foot lift in the river in a 30 to 40 minute window, and just very minimal time to respond. um, and that's what's made this such a tragic event, or is that combination of things that go together there. So um,
Yeah. And I know that you mentioned cloud seeding, and I want to get into that. But before we get into that, where do we go next? What is, maybe other church camps are watching right now saying, so what do we do?
mhm,
What can we do? What do you think
mhm.
the next steps are for events like this?
Well, I think first of all, you have to understand what the weather is capable of in your area, right? So, like, I'll use Oklahoma for example. Now, we've had some catastrophic flooding events in Oklahoma, but we've never had anything like that. But if I'm a church camp, let's say, or a summer camp in Norman, Oklahoma, can I get flash flooding? Yes, but it's really just going to be a rise of water, right? And it's not going to be a wall of water, right? So we're more interested in, if the water is going to get so high that it's going to impact like into um into buildings and structures like that, it's going to happen much slower in Oklahoma. It's not going to happen in 30 minutes. It's going to happen over the course of 4 or 5 hours. And so the ability to respond is different. The National Weather Service in Norman does things different for that reason. Now, they will tell you there is one area that they do pay close attention to, and that's Turner Falls. That area can create some pretty quick flash flooding. There's some hills. It's on limestone rock. So we do have a little, and there's a bunch of church camps right there at Turner Falls. And we've seen that creek turn into a raging river. Um, you know, so um, it's something that you have to watch out for. You know, um, Colorado's another area. Like, you got to watch out for that stuff there. But Indiana, Illinois, like those conditions don't happen like that there. Brett said, don't go float with the flood watch, for one. And there's some truth to that, but also ask yourself the question: how many times have there been flood watches issued and there wasn't flood? Right? It just If the flood watch just says conditions are favorable, like we're expecting the potential for heavy rain is there. But look, everybody loves to say the meteorologist is wrong half the time, right? Okay, yes, you're right. We can be wrong half the time, and we know it, right? And so, a lot of times it's I actually like to say it's if you can prepare for how you're going to react when something is going to happen. Because again, I think some of those conditions were there, to give them enough notice. Um, had they known something like this was possible, and I want to make sure to emphasize that, had they known something like this was possible, I think that there was ways that they could have responded better. I also don't think that they knew something like this was possible, and that's sad. And it's very easy for us all to Monday morning quarterback this thing, right? And go, yeah, you should have thrown to the wide out over there because he was wide open, right? But look, you had some linebacker in your face, and you couldn't see it when he did it, right? So yeah, it's
You
easy
couldn't
on
see
video
it
to
and you
watch it.
had a split second to respond. That response time is so, so fast. So you're completely, yeah, correct. You didn't know that that was even an option, and you didn't even know that you should be doing that because you had that very, very quick response time that, you never know how you're going to act and react in that response time.
So I mean, those are all things that I think, you need to take into account. You need to to look at, right? Like again, if this were to happen again next year, I'll almost guarantee. I mean, people will lose their life if it happens again. I promise. Like 100% people will lose their life, but it's probably 10. It's a sad number, but it's not at this level, right? Because it just happened. Now, this has happened before, right? So this isn't the first time that this area has happened. 1987, they had a huge Guadalupe River. 10 teenagers from a church camp caught in the rushing water as they attempted to evacuate. Think about that.
Uh,
They were actually attempting to
they were
evacuate.
attempting to leave, yeah. And I
Yeah,
have a
and
feeling that a lot of people were probably in the same boat in this situation as well, but it's not 10. There's still 160 people missing right now,
mhm,
yet to be
yeah,
found.
yeah. I mean, so this is an amazing part of the country. If you've never been to the hill country of Texas, I recommend you go check it out. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country. It is amazing. Um, However, Mother Nature can be very, very dangerous. Um, you know, and so I think it's something that you've got to just have a respect for it. Um, you know, so
Absolutely.
should we
Absolutely.
tackle the big gorilla in the room?
Are we ready? So I guess, we talked about like how this came about, how this conversation on weather modification and cloud seeding has come about. We've talked about this just absolute tragic event, and people are looking in different directions to say what happened. How could this happen? And I think one of the topics, one of the fingers have been pointed at cloud seeding and weather modification. So, Derek, I'll kind of let you lead from here, but I do want to talk about, like, why are people so interested in this topic? I think a lot of them are concerned. Do they have a reason to be concerned?
Uh, I mean, from this flooding event, no. This I guess I just came out and said that. So I don't think I disagree with anyone that says this event was caused or enhanced by cloud seeding. I don't think that is the case at all. Um, so um, so with that in mind, what did cause it? Why are people concerned? Is there valid concerns? Because I do have some concerns about cloud seeding. I think this is kind of funny. Is and I kind of stand in different spots on this as well. But so if I were to say something along the lines of man-made climate change is a thing, there is one side of our political system and our population that's going to yell at me and say that's not true. And I'm not saying that is or is not true, okay? Um, but that same side that is against that's like this isn't something that we should worry about, is the side that's against that doesn't think that thinks cloud seeding is a problem. And cloud seeding, in my opinion, um, potentially could be a problem. I don't know. These are questions that I think we should ask. Is really what I want to kind of pose is like, let's think about these types of things. Is Cloud seeding, in my opinion, is man-made climate manipulation. So I don't think that we've done it to the extent that we have created climate change from the amount of cloud seeding that we have done. But I do think people have aspirations to do it to that level, but it hasn't been done yet. Um, so um, so those are so for example, we've been doing cloud seeding in the US since the 1940s. This is actually something new that I learned. Did not know that it had been being done. Is it effective? Yes, the answer is yes. We can actually prove that cloud seeding does work. It does create rain. We were able to finally prove that in 2017 with some of the advances in radar that have happened. They were able to fly the plane cloud seeding in a Z pattern, and it created rain in a Z pattern. Now, here's the deal, though. They have to put the chemical into a cloud because what it does is, so our sky is full of really tiny nuclei, right? These little particles of dust and ash and dirt, all kinds of stuff, right? But they're microscopic, they're tiny, and this is what water in a cloud cools and condenses to. And most of the time, especially in dry desert, arid areas, there's not enough moisture to collect on those nuclei to make that droplet heavy enough to fall to the ground as rain. So what they do is they seed this chemical in that provides a bigger nuclei. And so more water can accumulate to that larger nuclei, and it becomes heavy enough that it falls as rain. That's how it works. And um, so but it happens, it's like an instant thing, right? So as soon as the cloud is seeded, it rains and it falls to the ground. Now, is it safe? I'm not even going to go into that. I haven't done any research on any of that. Like, is the chemical, could it hurt people? Could it hurt plants? Not even going to go into that part of it, right? So that's a whole nother ball of wax that we don't have time, and maybe we can do a future podcast on that, and maybe even bring some experts in to talk about it. But that's how it works. And so, yes, they did cloud seed on July 2nd, 2 days before the event, or really 36 hours before the event. Texas, though, has regulations that when heavy rain is around, they're not allowed to cloud seed. And so, with the forecast that was already in place before the cloud seeding occurred, because the models were already forecasting heavy rain. Now, the location of the heavy rain was kind of bouncing around, and they weren't doing a really great job on pinpointing where the heavy rain would happen at. And I'll go into that. In my opinion, that's because it's a tropical system that's has no steering pattern with it. The jet stream wasn't around, so the steering pattern just allowed this tropical system to kind of float. The models really struggled grasping on where it was going to set up at. However, the cloud seeding was done. It maybe it created rain. I don't know. I didn't look at any of that, but it would have created very minimal precip. And it was done southwest of San Antonio is the location that it was done. So, and so it would have impacted the clouds in that area, and then it would have been over with. Now, my concern with cloud seeding has been more climate change, right? So the CEO of Rainmaker has said publicly that he would like to make the deserts green.
Yeah, his
What?
goal is to bring back all of the vegetation to the deserts.
Yeah, and that is climate change. 100%, right? So a desert's a desert. It's there for a reason. So what happens if you make Arizona and New Mexico wet? What does that do to the weather pattern? One, there, but what does it do to the weather pattern in Oklahoma or Texas, right?
Yeah,
Because, Oklahoma and Texas are dry and arid ish, right? At times, like we're wet and we're dry. So we kind of mix the both because we're we're equally separated from the Gulf of Mexico and from the desert in the Southwest. So,
and then we've
sometimes
got
we're
the
more
mountains in
influenced.
between.
Yeah, and sometimes we're more influenced by the desert and the mountains, and sometimes we're more influenced by the Gulf of Mexico. But what if we get rid of the desert and now we're influenced by a lush green area with lots of precip, and we're influenced by the Gulf of Mexico? What does that do to our weather in Oklahoma or Texas? Maybe it has a good impact. I don't know, but that's the question. I don't know what the impact would be, and maybe wouldn't have any impact at all. But
I think a big question too with that, Derek, is we're a very stationary society. Way back in the day, if something were to happen, something like that, a big climate change like that, people move. People were
Mhm.
not stationary. They were very adaptable. But we are a very stationary society. My grandparents live in Oklahoma. My great grandparents live in. We've been here for you know, so long, we don't move, you know?
Yeah.
And so those farmers, they're used to farming on their conditions. There are people that are used to doing things because of the weather conditions in their area. And we have set up our society for the weather conditions currently in our area. If those start to change, what does that look like for society on a whole? Not only for our weather conditions, but how that impacts a very, very large group of people. That's my question in all of this is what would that look like for a society that is extremely capable of working with the conditions that are currently in place. And we
Mhm.
know what they are. We know what those hazards are. Now, do we always respond correctly? Not always, no. But
Yep.
we know what those hazards are. We know what the problems are. If we introduce new problems that we don't even know what they are, what does that look like?
And so here's the next thing that I want to do is I want to kind of introduce just some logic here, right? And so the logic that I want to introduce is, so I've seen people say, nothing like this has ever happened before, which we've already said they've had lots of floods in this area. But let's even go back. Let's tie in the time of year, the meteorology, and the location. Okay, so I'm going to go to 1978, August of 1978, the remnants of Tropical Storm Amelia, which we just had the remnants of Tropical Storm, was it Barry? Is
Very.
that what it was?
Mhm.
Barry, yeah, yeah. Almost said Bill for some reason, I don't know why. Which goes into another point, right? Americans didn't know anything about Barry
Yeah.
because it made landfall in Mexico,
Yeah.
and then it meandered its way up. And this isn't the first tropical system to explode overnight over a landmass multiple days after it happened. I'm
A
gonna
lot of
challenge.
Oklahomans can
Please give
remember
it up.
Tropical Storm Aaron. I think that we were going in the same direction. Did I steal
We
your
were,
thunder there?
we were, yeah. So that dropped 12 to 13 inches of rain, had hurricane force gusts and tropical storm force winds sustained in Oklahoma. The thing literally formed an eye overnight in Oklahoma and caused catastrophic flooding. Now, it wasn't flash flooding like this because we don't have the hills and the landmass like they had. But if we did, we would have had the same thing. But Tropical Storm Amelia in 1978 did the same thing in this same area, almost in the same time of year because it was the first part of August. So we're talking summertime, right? Time of year where we don't get a lot of rain. But Amelia dropped up to 30 inches of rain. That's more than this one dropped.
Wow.
So, like, this this has happened. It's happened several times in this area. And July and August, which is typically one of the drier months, it's also not that uncommon in Oklahoma's the same way to get extreme rainfall in those months from tropical systems. And that's why that happens. So this isn't unheard of. Um, and so at the end of the day, the way that I kind of look at it is you know even if they just started cloud seeding, right, this has happened before, so it's not like you the easier conclusion isn't to go, oh, cloud seeding caused this. The easier conclusion is to go, look, this has happened multiple times in the exact same way that this has happened. Make the assumption that this is the same thing happened again here, right? Especially when we know how cloud seeding works and um, the impact that it has. And really, it's more of an impact. It's not a delayed. Like we don't seed clouds to get rain for the next 2 weeks. They have to seed the clouds and make it rain in a very quick process. Um, so
And
yeah.
that's
So go ahead.
something I want to talk about, but I also want to make sure that I know that you mentioned talk about the models for the 4th of July weekend, kind of how they were all over the place
Yeah.
and heavy rain in some areas, but not heavy rain in others. Then in the next model run, that would change.
And that's going to be a lot. So tropical systems, one, especially they're typically not tied to the jet stream. If a tropical system is tied to the jet stream, it moves very quickly. But it's not uncommon. So the pattern that we had at this time period was a northwest flow, and so the jet stream was well up into Montana, and it went all the way down through like Kansas and up and that, but there was no jet stream impacting Texas, and so as this system rolled into, kind of did the normal curve that all tropical systems do. They make landfall, they turn north, and then they turn northeast. It did so, but it just did it in a very slow pace. I don't remember what day it made landfall, but it was multiple days before it meandered into Texas. But
So I
they're
think it
really
made landfall on Sunday night, and then
okay.
July 4th was Friday, the
Yeah,
5 days
so an
later.
entire week almost goes by before this system gets up there. And so think about it though as like a spinning top, right? So if you were to take a top and spin it on a table, it's going to kind of just wobble around, and like it's really really difficult to forecast where it's going to go on the table. But if you took the top and spun it and then had a fan blowing across the table, it's going to blow across the fan. Like the fan's just
Mhm.
going to push it off, off the other end. You probably could forecast where it's going to go fairly easy. It's the same thing happened with this. That we had the top made landfall, and there really wasn't anything to steer it, so it just kind of wobbled around. And so the models are trying to pinpoint, and they're in the ballpark, right? They were somewhere between Dallas and San Angelo and south of San Antonio, like somewhere in that area, there was going to be really heavy rain. And there was really heavy rain. I think most of the models were a little further north with it than what it ended up being. Um, but it was consistent enough that the National Weather Service was still able to issue a flash flood watch for that area. So there was definitely a signal that it was going to happen. And keep in mind, the models don't know when people cloud seeds, so they can't. Cloud seeding might ruin someone's wedding because the models didn't forecast rain and and they made it rain on your wedding, right? We talked about that as kind of a joke, but wouldn't be a joke to the bride. I don't think that's ever happened, but the models do not get cloud seeding data fed into them. So so it's an interesting topic to look at, but something that you need to know about.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I I don't think that's something that we consider whenever we talk about cloud seeding, especially as meteorologists. We don't consider that there could be external factors into, on a very small level, but, into your forecast.
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. Brett just mentioned weather balloons, less weather balloons. Does that feed into it? I think that there is a potential that that could have an impact on it. But I will say, you know, Brett, just to kind of be devil's advocate on this. I mean, how many times have we seen a tropical system with a lack of weather balloons still not be forecastable? So I don't know that I would necessarily blame this on that either. I mean, could it have had a minor impact on it? Potentially. But really, at the end of the day, we had a watch issued 18 hours before the event. It's an area that historically has had significant flash, what we really would look at as a flash flood. Um, and but it was just it was at a different level. The time of year didn't work. The time of night didn't work. A bunch of stuff came together. It's extremely unfortunate. Makes me sick to my stomach to think about it. And I think in the Weather Brains podcast, they actually mentioned this. They said, you know what? Sometimes we just need to sit down and mourn together and just be quiet and just mourn the loss of these was 116, um
116.
116 people and potentially a lot more um you know to that. So yeah, and Brett said he's not blaming it on that, and I didn't take it that way, Brett. So but I have seen lots of people that do want to blame it on that. And um and I think it's yeah, I mean, could more weather balloons help our weather forecasting? I do think it could. Um, you know, but we could also say that, on the inverse, right? Could we have been doing, should we be doing 3 weather balloon launches a day at all locations always, not one like we do? Maybe that would also
Yeah.
be helpful. So it all, it's all how much money do you got? All that stuff kind of factors in.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people have, mentioned this, but one of the first initial, fingers to be pointed at whenever all of this came out was the National Weather Service. But as we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, if you weren't here for that, they were fully staffed and maybe even more than what they would normally be. Normally, they would have 1, 2 meteorologists in the National Weather Service office on a normal quiet day, maybe a holiday, but on this day they had 5. So they were plenty staffed. We cannot point any fingers in their direction. I think that that is something that we hit very hard at the very beginning of this topic. But again, that was 40 minutes ago. So I think it's
Mhm.
something worth being resaid.
Yeah, for
So Derek,
sure.
we can go back to cloud seeding. We can kind of talk about the difference between contrails and chemtrails. Is this effective? Where do you want to go from here?
Well, I mean, for sure. So, I mean, I'll touch on the contrails, chemtrails, right? So, first of all, planes make a cloud behind them when conditions are favorable. And sometimes they're barely favorable, and so they'll, right? So, if you take something really hot and put it in something really cold, it cools and condenses. I have no idea what Alec's talking about here. He's using all kinds of, oof,
Well,
there's an interest. Yeah.
I
Double
think
strike. It's a double strike. I like that. All caps too. He at least got his name put up in here. So yeah. So planes make a cloud behind them. That's not uncommon. That is not them releasing chemicals into the atmosphere. Now they do that's kind of the way that they cloud seed though, right? So they would put something on the wings and they would put it behind, but it's not your commercial airliners that you see, which is 99.9% of the the stuff that you're seeing.
mhm.
So it's conditions are favorable for something really hot to make a cloud. Um, at the end of the day, that's what we're seeing, and it's not uncommon. So um, that's just the way that it works. It's it's definitely a, meteorology 101 for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so
But people see them in the sky and they say, "What in the world is happening?" You know, they see those lines behind the planes, and I think that it does freak a lot of people out. Basically,
mhm.
particles freeze faster whenever it's cooler, way up in the atmosphere, and that's what you're seeing. Is you're just seeing those particles that are freezing a lot faster up there.
Yep.
Is cloud seeding effective? You know, I think Rainmaker just came out and said that it is very effective. However, I found a article from the government that came out with its effectiveness back on December 2024, so pretty recent, about 6 months ago. And they said that, you know, the additional water that you get from a cloud is between about 0 and 20%. So it's about 0 to 20% effective, essentially, is what they said. They said reliable information is lacking on the conduct of optimal, effective cloud seeding, its benefits and its effects. You know, so for some people, that 0 to 20% is totally worth it. Yes, we need that water. We'll take 0 to 20%. For other people, you know, like is it worth all of this? You know, we don't know the long term impacts. Is it worth that? So I thought that was really interesting that the government came out and said 0 to 20% is its effectiveness. Now, maybe we've got better technology now that can increase that effectiveness. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, obviously, it's a business decision when it's made, right? So people are paying for this to be done.
Mhm.
So it's, it boils down to does it, is 20% worth it? I'm not an expert on that, so I definitely couldn't give you, is it worth it or not? Could be. Um, I I personally am kind of like you. That doesn't seem like a lot. So, um, but
It doesn't, but
I
maybe that is worth the time. You know, a little rain goes a long ways.
it definitely can, and he definitely said, they're better at snow, which makes sense, right? So raindrops, especially if you're doing it in an arid region, right? So, okay, we made raindrops, they're falling, but they're going to evaporate as they fall to the ground. So you're going to see a lot less precip actually hit the ground. Whereas if, if it's just a snowflake, the snowflakes can evaporate, believe it or not, sublimation, but typically, snowflakes they're more likely to reach the ground. They're also probably doing more snow in mountain regions to create snow on mountains, which then has to melt and can help fill rivers and things like that. So, um, enhance orographic lift. Mountains also create clouds a lot, so you have to have a cloud. You can't cloud seed on a bright sunny day. You need clouds to actually. You have to seed the cloud. So they don't make the cloud. The cloud has to be there, and then they just help the cloud precipitate. So mountains are really good at creating clouds, and sometimes not creating precipitation. So that's probably an area where they might be able to have a little bigger impact.
Makes sense. Do you want to talk about regulation, state versus federal regulation?
Yeah, we can hit on that real quick. So currently, Brett Taylor, I think you said you've kind of done a little bit of research on this, but federal doesn't really touch it a whole lot. Federal government doesn't, but states do. Um, and is it 4 or 5 states? I can't remember what we had uncovered. There's a handful of states that have some regulations in place.
Yeah, I've seen some contradicting reports about which states do and which states don't. I think it really just depends on semantics. What verbiage are you using? So what I've seen is that at least Tennessee and Florida have absolutely banned weather modification. We've got another 30 something states that have some sort of legislation in process to either regulate or ban it. That has
Mhm.
not been passed yet. Um, the government article that I read is that 9 states are using it and 10 have banned it or considered banning it. So there's a little bit of contradiction there. However, we know that at least the majority of our states have some sort of stance on it and have some sort of legislation either in the works or that has already been passed. But it's at the state level. NOAA requires anyone conducting weather modification to report the activity within 10 days prior and after conducting it. Other than that, NOAA basically says we are not funding it, we are not supporting or um, restricting you from it. We just want to know about it. And you
Mhm.
can find all of those reports on their website. They do report that quarterly.
Yeah. So I mean, the states do it. You know, it's I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily have a take. I feel like obviously what happens in one state can have some ramifications downstream. So I feel like the federal government should probably make somewhat of a stance on it if they want to allow it to happen. There should be some barriers that the states have to kind of operate within. But I also agree the states have the right to make. I'm all for small government, so I think the states should have the opportunity to set some sort of parameters. No, we don't want it, or we do want it, but we want these restrictions around it. Um, and then again, the debate is up. Should it happen or not? I've kind of talked about some of my concerns for that, but I don't think we'll actually really know.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I think that downstream effect is a really good point. What happens if we do this in Texas? If we do this in New Mexico, what happens in Texas?
We do it with rivers, right? Like
That's
you want
exactly
to put
correct.
a dam on a river. Well, you gotta measure the impacts downstream of that river. And that's not just a single state. Oklahoma doesn't get to say we want to dam the Arkansas River. Arkansas gets to have a little bit of say in that as well. Um, because they also use that water. Um, so it's stuff like that. Um,
Okay, I have a few fun questions here.
okay.
Just kind of get the ball rolling, get your gears turning. I want people to be able to think about this, people to be able to be educated and make their own opinion, right? Everyone's allowed to have their own opinion. We want to make sure
Mhm.
that you're educated to make that opinion correctly. Let's go back to HailTrace. Has HailTrace ever tracked storms or weather that was influenced by cloud seeding?
Not that I know of. So typically, we track severe weather. Um, and so anytime there's a threat of severe weather, it's been basically regulated that you can't cloud seed. Now I will say in Canada, they do cloud seed to stop hail. I will say if they're trying to do it everywhere, it must not be effective because I've seen some pretty significant hail in Canada. So that would tell me that it did. If it worked, there we wouldn't track hail in Canada anymore. So I don't have any experience on what its effectiveness is. We don't track Canada weather as much as we do in the U.S., but we definitely have tracked some pretty significant hailstorms in Calgary, and I know that's an area that they have cloud seeded to stop hail. But I've seen significant hail move through the city almost every year, actually. Um, so I don't think it's working too well.
So not terribly effective maybe up in Canada. That was another question I had was hail suppression. Companies like WeatherMod are currently doing research and cloud seeding for hail suppression. I don't know how effective that is either.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, I mean, there's still hail, so I don't know. And again, the atmosphere creates hail. It's part of its, equalization of the atmosphere. So, does that have an impact on future weather, different weather? Does it make stuff worse someday, better someday? I mean, again, it's really hard to understand what the impacts of that could be.
Um, is this becoming more common? Are we seeing weather modification activities increase?
I would have to say, based off of the podcast that I listened to from the CEO of Rainmaker, which we'll post in the comments for you guys, I would have to assume that it is on the increase, that it's not on the decrease. There's some funding behind it now, so my assumption is that there is more cloud seeding occurring today than there was probably 10 years ago, and I will probably see that continue to increase, unless the federal government steps in and makes some different changes on that.
Now, I think one question that I've seen online is going back to the Twisters movie. Can we stop? We know that we
Uh,
can create more rain. We know that we can create more snow. Can we prevent big weather events from happening? Can we prevent those big tornadoes from happening?
Today, no. Is there a possibility that we could figure out a way? Maybe. Is it smart to do so? Probably not. Again, Mother Nature kind of, like, the Earth is a lot bigger than we are. Um, and the way that I view it, the Earth, God created this Earth and He created it in the way that it's supposed to operate. It kind of has this way of equalizing itself, and sometimes it does create some violence. And so, um, it's unfortunate when it happens and it impacts us in a bad way, but um, it 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 works the way that it was designed to work, and so I don't think it's our job to change that design. Um,
Mm, yeah. Could this create, we talked about stopping those storms, but could it create more destructive tornadoes, more downbursts, microbursts downstream?
uh, I mean, I since we can't do it, I would say, I mean, who knows, but I mean, potentially, yeah, I guess it's possible. I mean, anything's possible, right? Like, my take is, again, is, we get severe weather because the instability in the atmosphere is too much. And so the severe weather equalizes that instability and creates more of a neutral environment. And so if we get rid of the Earth's ability to neutralize the what's wrong in the atmosphere at that moment, then do we create more of that negative, that bad instability, and then in return create worse storms? Um, I don't know. Um, I, I guess I guess some people would say, well, mess around and find out. Um,
It's not. It's a lot of unknowns right now.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
All right. Well, those are all of my questions. I have on here also, Oklahomans are probably waiting for me to ask, can you turn our terrible ice storms into snowstorms so we can actually enjoy the winter weather? And my assumption is we still don't know. Like,
yeah. I don't.
it's not that easy.
Yeah, you got to change the temperature profile, not the preset. So how do I make it warm or not warm? All the way through which that all streams typically from the Pacific, right, and the Gulf of Mexico, right. So we get a lot of warm air pulled up at the surface, and undercuts right up underneath that cold air in Oklahoma. So how do you cool that layer off? Good luck. It's a big area. You got to figure out how to cool off.
Very
Sometimes five,
complicated.
sometimes 10 degrees. I mean, it's not even close. It's 40 something degrees above our head. So uh, good luck with that. Move to
So maybe
Colorado. They
maybe
get
we
a lot
don't
of snow.
stop. There you go. Go to the mountains.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are all of the questions that I have today, Derek. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you really want to hit on before we head out?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it'll be interesting. Everybody post your comments, your questions. We're not again. We've talked about. I think Taylor, you've talked to an expert in Canada about doing hail seeding. We've talked about maybe doing one of those. If you're interested in us doing one of those, hit that subscribe button on YouTube or on our social media. Put in the comments, hey, I would love to hear this expert on cloud seeding for hail. To stop hail. I would love to hear what he has to say. And we'll see if we can't get him on to talk about some of that. Maybe we can get somebody that's an expert in cloud seeding to produce rain. See what that does. I mean, we're definitely not opposed. I'm not even opposed to bringing somebody on that's kind of way out in left field on their stance on it. To get their real opinion, give them the spot to say what they want to say. Right or wrong. Again, I think it's about creating healthy conversation and not this social media, which is typically one sided, where it's like I'm gonna just blast everything and everybody. Let's create a conversation around it. Be open to learn, and if we're open to learn, everything will continue to improve as a society.
I like that mentality. Just continue to learn. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate everyone hopping on and asking. We had some great questions in the comments section. So keep those coming. We do a live forecast every day at noon, so you can join us for that every weekday as well. And we continue to post weather updates every single day on all of our social media platforms, so follow us over there. All right, thanks for joining us today. I'm meteorologist Taylor Cox here with our CEO of HailTrace, Derik Kline, and we will see you back here for more great conversations like this in the future.